Okay, guys, so welcome to another Avenue Code talk. My name is Arthur. I'm a UI engineer here in Avenue Code, and this talk is building awesome UI components with Sass. And for those of you who don't know what Sass is, I'm talking about style sheets. And style sheets, they're related to CSS, and I guess you guys are familiar with CSS, right? CSS is a style sheet language used to describe the look and formatting of documents, such as HTML. So here's an example of CSS, basic example. I'm not going to explain it. But here you can see two examples of CSS. On the left, you see I'm styling a table and a cell. But the problem here is there's no reference to the cell. There's no reference between the table and the cell. So allegedly, I could simply have a cell without a table. And the problem can be fixed in the second example, writing table in front of TD. But still, that's not very good because I still have two blocks. They're separate. I could have any code in the middle of them, and it would not be very good. Another problem here with simple CSS is because, for example, I'm using a color here. It's a dark gray. And if I wanted to use it anywhere else, I couldn't reuse the code. I would simply copy and paste. And if I wanted to change one day, I would have to go into the code and read the entire document and change all those colors. So Sass tries to fix that and provide us with a bunch of other cool features. Sass stands for Syntactically Awesome Stylesheets. And the cool features it provides are variables, mix-ins, nesting, inheritance, operations, and better referencing. Those are some of the features that we're going to cover today. Actually, we're going to cover all of them, and Sass has other features we're not going to cover today, but anyways, it's still very cool. So for the example I showed before, we have this Sass solution. We have two different syntaxes. The first one is Haml-based. It's the one on the left, and it used to be the only syntax for Sass. And now we have the more recent SCSS, which is the second one, and we can see that it solved those two problems I mentioned. First of all, by nesting the elements, so there's a clear relationship between table and TD. And also by creating a variable for the color gray. So we solve both of the problems with this approach. Now, before we get into talking about Sass, Sass is a CSS preprocessor, so you have to install it in your computer. It's written in Ruby, so you have to install Ruby first. There's a link to that. If you are a Mac user, it comes pre-installed, but if you're not, you have to go to that link and install it. Then you have to install the gem, which is a simple command I show in number 2, and then you have to run it. Those are two commands. The first one only watches for a single file, so if you're working on a Sass file, in only one file, you can use the first command, and if you're working with multiple files, you can watch the entire folder, and it's gonna get all the files in the source styles folder and compile them to the target styles folder as soon as you save them. That's why we use the watch option. So you don't have to go back and run it every time. You simply save the file.
Arthur, a Sass file would be like translated to a CSS file.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's what it does. It translates everything you write in Sass into normal, regular CSS.
Okay.
So let's start by, this is very practical, so we're going to build a component here. I'm going to try to build it fast, but let's see how it goes. Imagine the design team sent you this story. You have to build this button, and it's not a simple button. It has a lot of details. If you take a look, it's kind of like 3D, and it has this border and different fonts. And if you click it, it's supposed to go down like a real button. And it's completely different than the default HTML button. So you have to work on a bunch of details to actually do it. So here I'm not going to run Sass like I explained in the previous slide. I'm going to use JS Fiddle, which is an online tool to help us code and see the results at the same time. So here I have the sample button. It's the regular HTML button. And I have already written some code here, and this is actually Sass code. The first two are variables, and we can tell that because the variable has a $sign in front of it. So that's a variable for the background color and a variable for the font size. And I'm using the variables here, the background color and the font size. Now, you can mix regular CSS with Sass. So I decided for any reason that I do not need a variable for padding, so I didn't use it. And also, it's good to mention that Sass has this notion of scope. So if I declare a variable inside a block, it's going to work too. For example, let's make it red. And inside the body scope, the background color variable is red. Now, usually what I see is that people declare their variables in the beginning of the file, something that we can relate to global variables in regular programming languages. But I think that's easier for you to keep your code, maintain your code, because you don't have to dig your code looking for variables everywhere.
After, if I have like multiple CSS, like I have two files of Sass, and the first one I have some variables. If I import the first one first and the second one just below the first one, will the second one have access to the variables of the first one?
Supposedly, yes. Yes. So anyways, we're not going to see that today, but we're going to work with one file, but yes, you should be able to do that. Anyways, what we're going to do here is take a look at this button. It's very different from the one we want, right? We want something like this. So first thing, it's bigger. It has a bigger padding. It has no margin. And yeah, let's start by building that. So I'm not going to type the entire code because I copied here already. So I'm just going to keep copying and pasting and explaining to you guys. So here under visual, oh, by the way, these are regular comments for Sass. Comments in Sass, when you write it like this, with double slashes, it does not go to the CSS file. If you write regular comments with the, like this, it goes to the CSS file. Anyways, I want the border to be bigger and a padding, so okay, now it looks a little bit better. And I also want it to be rounded because our button has rounded corners. So here I could write regular code like this, but this is very bad for Sass because we want to reuse as much as we can, right? So what I'm going to create here is I'm going to create a variable for the radius. This is easy, right? Then I'm going to create what we call a mixin, and this is probably the most powerful thing in Sass. Mixin is kind of like a macro, if you guys have used macros before. When you include a mixin, it copies whatever is inside and replaces in the original place. So what we want to do here, we created this mixin that receives the parameter radius. It's going to replace radius with the parameter we used, and it's going to include wherever we want, right? So if we include rounded, and we write our variable button radius, which is 4 pixels, our button is going to be rounded the way we want. Correct? If we increase this variable here, obviously our button changes. So mixins are very, very powerful. We can build a lot of different things using mixins. For example, we're going to build, the button we wanted has a gradient in the background. So to do this, we can do the same thing we just did. We can create some variables for the gradient, the two colors we want. We can create a mixin for the gradient, kind of right here. And then we include the mixin the same way. Now you see that this time the mixin has two different parameters, and that's okay too. If we refresh, now we see that the gradient is done. Our button has also a little 3D effect, which is done with box shadow. We can do it with box shadow. So if I want to create a mixin for box shadow, that's very good because I'm going to reuse this code whenever I want to create box shadow, right? So I'm going to do the same thing, create a few variables here, create the mixin. So I have the color, I have the height, created the mixin for the box shadow, and now I just have to include the box shadow. Now, this time I'm going to explain that the parameter can have multiple things. It could be CSS mixed up with variables. It doesn't matter, right? Sass is going to build the entire string and pass it as one single argument. So now we have the 3D effect. Now I don't know if you can see on your screen, but there's a problem here that there's no border on the top. Can you see that? And according to the story, we're supposed to have a border on the top. And here we don't. So what we're going to do is we can pass two arguments here, and Sass is smart enough to understand that we only expect one, so it transforms two into one. I'm going to show you what this means. Now, this is not two, I'm using two different shadows, but I'm expecting only one parameter. So what Sass does is realizes this should be only one, so it considers it one argument only. It doesn't matter if there's a comma here. If I'm expecting only one, then this is one.
So why did you use that?
Huh?
Which value is going to use there?
Which value is what?
Since you're passing two parameters, right?
Yeah.
Which one is going to use inside the...
I'm not passing two. This is one. According to Sass, now this is one because I'm expecting one. So it's going to write into shadow, right? Not only one. It's going to write the whole thing.
Whole string. Like the whole speak.
Yes, because I want a real comma here. I don't want two parameters. I want
you don't have like escape too in the comma to see that it's two variables or something in the value of the.
No. Yes.
Oh, pretty cool.
So for example, if I expect two shadows here, imagine shadow 2.
Just be two shadows.
And now I'm not using shadow 2 now, right? So it disappears, obviously, because now it considers to be two parameters. Okay, so our button still doesn't look exactly like the one we want because the font is different. So I'm just gonna keep doing this, and you can use regular CSS if you don't think that a mixin would add value to your style sheet. You don't have to use it, right? You only use it when you think it's something you could reuse. In this case, if I think I can't reuse font family, I'm not going to create a mixin for font family just because, right? You should only create things that you think that are actually valuable. You can continue doing this. I'm going to create a few more variables here. Okay, one thing I like to do is, for example, even when I think that it's only one line of code, but the line doesn't tell exactly what I want to mean, I usually add a mixin. For example, text shadow describes a shadow, but in this case, I used specific value here that makes makes the text shadow look like an embossed text and not a text shadow. So I create a mixin to encapsulate that idea, so my code becomes a little bit more readable, and I could add it here, just regular. And I think I didn't create this variable here, so I'm going to create it in a color. And just copy the whole thing. Okay. Now, something else that we can do is creating, I'm going to change the name here, creating mixins that do not receive any arguments. So if I want to make this button hoverable, I can create a mixin called hoverable. And then it has no arguments, right? And I can write it like this, or I could write a parenthesis. It doesn't matter. Now, this hoverable mixin is just like the others. It has a regular CSS inside. But then you see there's this ampersand sign here. And what this does is referencing the parent. So this is referencing the parent, whoever the parent is. In this case, the parent is button, because I'm including hoverable inside button. So the parent is going to be button. So when I hover button hover, the opacity is going to change, and it's going to take this value here. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So now I can make anything hoverable according to this idea. And now if I hover, the opacity is changing. Probably you guys are not seeing this well, so I'm going to change the value here, and you can tell better. And also, this opacity thing is not very good yet, because opacity is not, it doesn't work in every browser. There's specific prefixes for each browser. So what we can do is creating another mixin and adding a mixin inside a mixin. That's also possible. I'm going to show you right now. If you write an opacity mixin, you can now include opacity and pass it the parameter. So now I'm including a mixin inside a mixin, and that's okay as well. Also, mixins can have the same name as any CSS property. You don't have to worry about reserved words or anything like that.
So, but can you have that issue that he was saying before, like you have two different files with different variable names, you know, and each one...
Yeah, probably the last one is going to be used, right? Probably.
Another question is, does this get like compiled or interpreted when you land on the page?
Yes, it is translated to regular CSS, right? When you're running Sass, yes. So this is translated all the time too.
But does it work on HTML5 only, or is it like...
No, general. It's because it's CSS, right? Only if you use, for example, here I'm using many CSS properties, like box shadow, for example. Sass doesn't care about this, right? You can use Sass with CSS2 or...
Sass is, the thing that he's doing is like writing, the thing that you're writing in the SCSS file in the CSS file. Like it's
translating, yes.
Just the thing that you're including is some syntax of Sass mixed with syntax of CSS. So it doesn't matter the version. You just copy the thing that you put in the Sass syntax and write back in the CSS.
Yes, it just copies the value here.
Yeah.
And translates. So if I have a variable here, it simply replaces this with a value. That's all. So it's very, very simple, you know. So let's continue here. We still can't click our button to make that effect I showed you guys. So I'm going to use this referencing thing here, which is the ampersand. And I can write ampersand active, so it's going to be button active. So when the button is active, I can do whatever I want. So for example, if we want to make the background red, when I click, this is going to be red. But I'm going to jump this implementation here so you guys can see the final result of the button. What I did here was very simple. I used the box shadow I had, but I changed the shadow to the top instead of the bottom. So this dark part goes to the top. And I'm playing with the margins here to make it look like it's going down a little bit. So I'm increasing the top margin and decreasing the bottom margin. So that's basically what it's done here. So this is our button. It's very simple, but let's say the design team decides to create many variations. In CSS, maybe you'd have to copy the entire code or adding a new class, and that would be a little bit messy. But here, it should be pretty simple. See, what I did here, I created another class for the red button. I called it Special. And under Special, I just used the ampersand again, like I did before, and the ampersand sign. And I only changed the things that need to be changed. For example, the color of the text and the color of the background and so forth. That was very easy. If we wanted to make the other changes, for example, if we want to make the button very rounded, like we see in the first example here, it's very simple as well. We can create a new class, for example, super rounded. We can use we had a mix-in already called rounded. And we can use and we can pass it any value, right? You can write 40 pixels here. And if I add a class super rounded, this is not working for some reason. The button is now super rounded. Also, something else I didn't mention that Sass does is you can make operations like addition, subtraction, and so forth. So if I wanted to use the variable I had and simply multiply by 10, it was 4, right? Button radius is 4, as we can tell here. Button radius is 4. But if we multiply by 10, it's going to be 40, right? So that's what happens. If I multiply by 5, it's going to be 20. And that's it. So we can keep doing this and do all the variations I showed you guys here. And one last thing I'm going to talk about is, imagine you have a different button which is not using this tag button here. Because this tag was introduced in HTML5, right? We didn't have it before. Before that, we only had the input, yes. So it used to be simply like this, right? Input type button. So I'm going to show you how simple this is. I'm just going to paste the code here so I don't have to type it. But the only thing here we have to do, if we want to style another tag, in this case, is extend button. So I'm extending the same implementation of button to the input type button, right? If I didn't do this, the button would be different, of course. And extend is different than import. Import copies the code, so it would be, because I could create a mix-in for button, maybe a class or something, and then include everywhere, right? But then the code would be twice as big. In this case, extend does not copy the code, it copies the selector. So it's going to put the selector everywhere where button has. So, for example, this will become in the CSS this, right? And in this talk, I didn't worry about performance here, because of course it's better to code classes and IDs than tags like I did here. I only did tags to show you guys this specific example about the button, right? But normally you would want to style using classes, for example, dot button and not directly button. Okay? Alright, so we have our little button. The entire code is here in the final code. We can see that, just as an example, regular CSS can be very messy if we try to do the same thing. This is just a piece of code, and SCSS makes it a lot more readable. You can read what each mixin does, and it's very easier to read. You can learn more about Sass here on those websites. And if you like Sass, you could also like Less, which is another precompiler. Actually, we call it preprocessor, not precompiler. It's a little bit different. There are different features, but they're very, very similar. It's very easy to learn. Compass is something very useful for those who use Sass. There's, I think, MCOM and BCOM are using Compass, I think. And Stylus is another option too. And now I left you guys here with a task. If you guys want to do one of them, you don't have to do all. You can do just one of them. The first one is to style something different using Sass. It's a menu in this case. The second one is to make changes to the button. The code is provided. I'm going to share the presentation with you. And the third one is to do the same thing using Less. So that's a little bit harder because you're going to have to learn Less, but it's very simple as well. Right. Anyway, that's it. Do you guys have any other questions?
If the project want to implement Sass on instead of using regular CSS, how tough to implement to port the?
Oh, it's tough. I think it's tough because you have to go through the entire code. You know.
Okay.
You have to pretty much redo everything.
Oh, okay. There's no tool that it could.
I don't know. Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't think so. But
yeah.
You can check.
So, probably the browser needs to interpret the .scss.
No. You run a program on your computer.
All right, so you're gonna, for example, you're gonna run Maven install. Then you're gonna have some kind of Maven plugin that you're gonna go there and compile all the SCSS to CSS files.
Yes.
And then the browser just gonna read it normally.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Hi, it's Thiago here. I just wanted to compliment Becker that there is a guy called Grunt. He's just like a Maven, but he runs on the front end, and he can do that as well. It's actually faster, I think. So, Arthur, if you know something about Grunt, maybe you can show us.
Yeah, for those of you who use Grunt.js or Maven, there are specific solutions. I decided to talk about the standalone Sass version, just because we're talking about Sass. But there are plugins for Maven and, of course, for Grunt.js as well. Thank you, Chuck.
Welcome.
Anything else?
What about the performance of does it compile CSS functions? Because there are CSS functions too, right?
Like what?
There's CSS, you can have functions, right? So you can evaluate the CSS in runtime, you see.
Well, this is not runtime. This is translated, right? So
Compilation
it's going
time.
to be runtime.
For the
So it never compiles into a CSS function, never.
It's going to be always compression time. Yes.
It's going to be always just properties.
Yes. Mixins are kind of like functions, but they're macros. They're something.
Compile.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? Again, no? All right, thank you guys. Don't forget to do the and miles, because I'll give you back the
miles.
miles you spent.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys from Flickr too. Thank you.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Bye, Arthur. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Are you still recording? Have to finish.
Oh yeah.
When you say